about it because I resented the match for years to follow. It was a long journey for me to accept it and to, appreciate it and come to love it.
Why did you resent it?
Because it just overshadowed everything else I did, and it was the only thing people wanted to talk to me about. And Undertaker mentions that during the sit down. He says it's just you get asked about it so much, you can only answer the same question so many times. He said, you start making up stuff, and really, my route to appreciating it, my journey, if you will, was it was. It was in part when Undertaker came to my event in Austin, Texas. I think it was 2013. And he and Michelle came into the, my little green room area, and he goes, we started reminiscing, and he goes, Jack, what you and I did. He still called me Jack. I think he calls me Mick these days, but I liked it. I was still Jack because I met him as Cactus Jack. He was not mean Mark to me though, so I was Cactus Jack, but he was the Undertaker. He goes, what you and I did that night will outlive us both. And then I guess he saw the look in my eyes, and he goes, "What you and I did, people will be talking about what you and I did long after both of us are gone." And I got again. I mean, as I talk about it again, that same thing. And I remember driving back to my hotel, feeling like a weight was off my shoulders. Like he framed it in such a way that I realized this was something to 15 years after the fact. It's something to really be proud of and appreciate. Because there were times when, a couple of occasions, at least one specific occasion, when I was doing morning radio. I'm a terrible sleeper, always had trouble sleeping. And so my alarm clock would be the call from the radio station. So they'd get me at 6 a.m. with 2 hours sleep. And I remember yelling one time, going, I had other matches that I'm proud of where I wasn't knocked out. Maybe you could ask me about one of those. But we don't get to choose what touches other people. And so I have come to appreciate it. Part of it was watching, was what Undertaker said. Part of it was when my wife said to me, the children want to see that match. This is Mickey and Huey. And I think they were only like 5 and 7 at the time. And I was like, are you sure they should see that? She said, well, kids at school are talking about it. And I hadn't seen it in its entirety I could do the math later on, but probably in 10 years. And I just the clips, and been asked about the two bumps, especially the first one so many times it becomes like there's an episode of the Flintstones where Fred becomes like management, and he just says the same three things. What's your line? I don't know if he's just on like autopilot. And that's the way I felt for so many years, especially in the era of the WWE appearances, where it's 2 hours max. There's always a big line because they promote the heck out of their things. They never want to put any of their talent from the bottom to the top in a position where, there's an empty, the Virgil photo. And, in fairness to Virgil, anyone who does a Comic Con is going to have that moment, because you're sometimes at a con for 20 hours over the course of 3 days. WWE, 2 hours, boom. The average time of the interaction is about 5 seconds. So it's not the type of place where you're going to have deep conversations. And literally, I would be saying over, oh, it's a tough day at the office, wouldn't want to go through that again. And you're just answering it the same way over and over and over. But when I watched the match with my children, that's when I realized, man, this packs a wallop. And it still does. It really still does. Even though, and the crazy thing is, there's not the crazy. And one of the interesting things is people have done things very nearly as dangerous. I mean, I remember Kevin Owens going off the top of the cage through a table, and I think because of social media, um, even the greatest things today are quickly forgotten. They're like digested, spit out, and we're on to the next thing. It reminds me of like the revolving sushi conveyor belts, where you, you're just so busy grabbing whatever you want and taking it that you don't really have a chance in a lot of occasions to really fully appreciate, the ingredients and finer qualities of like one little slice of the wrestling pie. And I think you can do that back in that day when the momentum was able to gradually, um, when we were able to gradually gain momentum like a snowball rolling downhill. I don't think you get that today. And I think if The Undertaker and I had done that match in the present day, it probably would have been talked about for 3 days, maybe a week max, and then we'd be on to the next thing. So I'm fortunate that this was something that was able to gather momentum over time, where it became bigger and bigger. And I mentioned this to someone who showed me their actual ticket. I was doing a signing in Pittsburgh yesterday to commemorate the event, and I've got a big sold out show in Burlington, Vermont, in 2 days on the day of the 25th anniversary. But there were people who had the chairs and ticket stubs, and that's the that's how you prove you were there, because I probably talked to more people who claimed they were there than could have physically fit into the Civic Arena.
Right.
And they're not lying. They're remembering history the way they wish it had unfolded with them being a witness to it.